step up a level and just throw out something provocative. Luigi, you've done work in looking at the way elites control politics and the economy, and also you've looked at the thing that undid that. And as I remember, in what generally undid that was free trade, right? Well, how did that mechanism work?
I think that I have to say that it works in smaller countries. I don't think it works for the United States. The reason is that if I'm a smaller country and my institution is screwed up big time, when there is free trade, I can compete, and so there is
you can't compete globally.
Exactly. So there is a natural pressure to sort of change institutions to make them better.
To compete globally.
Globally. I don't think that that works for a country as big as the United States. Also because the United States have pretty big power in setting the rules across the world. Right. So they set the rules that are most convenient for them to play globally.
Well, let's throw out just a thought exercise. The internet isn't geographically constrained in the way that a lot of other things are. If there were what I think of as an internet enterprise zone, a place in the world that created a policy framework that we can all imagine what that policy framework would be. It would conform to Yokai's 4 principles. It would actually drive all the way down to the specific implementation steps that we've talked about a little bit here. And it would be, and then they built a hosting infrastructure, a server infrastructure, and they said, send us your data. Is it possible that we could create an environment where the political system in the US all of a sudden recognized, wait, if data starts moving offshore, and if services start being hosted offshore, and if I no longer control access to that DNS, and if I no longer have a right within my legal system to go at and get that data or to surveil that data, and that economy started to grow, wherever that economy was, would that create the kind of competition that forced the elites to give up power in the smaller countries that you mentioned?
I think that's an interesting idea. And it says you want to create a Delaware, instead of a corporate law, a Delaware of internet.
Yes.
Iceland.
No, yeah,
but
but
started trying to do this in Iceland 4 years ago.
So they're still thinking about it.
Well, and they went further than simply thinking about it, but they didn't get all the way. They didn't get past principle to money. They didn't get past the idea of defending openness online by having a safe haven for bits. What they needed to do was to realize that there was money to be made in having a safe haven for bits.
So I know Yokai's been thinking about this, Iceland, and specifically you mentioned you were. I was there last week, and I met with a number of politicians there, and I had a conversation very similar to this with them. They are, that particular country is going to go through an election next year. The current politics in that country are such that the people that control the state today are the ones that came in after the collapse, and so it was sort of a reactionary election. There's some tiredness around the electorate, around that group, and there's some thought that another group will come in. The really interesting question is if there's a multi-party coalition around this that understood it as an economic development argument, not as a political argument. They do have the natural resource, essentially free power. They have now built, and I saw a couple of these, very sophisticated hosting centers. They have really good connectivity to Europe, not very good connectivity to the US. But they are 315,000 people that have a real incentive to create an economy to supplant the one that crashed. So if, and I'm not suggesting that Iceland is the place to do this, but if anyone did it, would it create a forcing function globally? Would it begin to take the, begin to make it look less palatable for any political elite to impose a set of constraints that would hurt their economy?
I would be wary of moving our energies in that direction and that hope. I'd say the best example of a situation where internationalization of a core functionality provided a real threat was the encryption battles of the 1990s, where the concern that initially you had the US trying to block encryption research, require backdoor, block encryption export, and as it looked like the business of producing high-end encryption was moving to Germany and Israel and various other places, they gave up. More than the politics, because that was the worst of all possible worlds.
Cindy Cohen made them give up.
Oh, it was a big group. He's not so wrong.
You're suggesting that the
laws are
first...
still on the books. Technically speaking, you're not supposed to send crypto to Iraq still and stuff. Everyone does anyway. But
That's a really long conversation. I think it's fair to say that in the main we won that battle.
okay.
And the main reason that I didn't focus on Cindy and the EFF was because I was trying to use that as an example, not of successes of internal domestic constitutional law, but of global arbitrage.
And a case that we've never made, and probably ought to, is that commerce on the internet would have been severely crippled if we hadn't been able to get that restriction taken away. Billions
So I think that
have been made.
the point that I wanted to make, it's just having read Luigi's book and at least the way I understood it, was that it was more an economic argument than a political argument that forced a number of these elite economies, elite political systems to open up. And I agree that it's not the people in this room shouldn't be going and trying to identify an internet enterprise zone and then working that set of politics, but it may emerge naturally. I mean, there are a number of economies around the world that understand this value and could create it. And the point that I think it illustrates is the possibility that, yes, we need to fight all the fights that we're talking about domestically, but ultimately, if we begin to see economic value shifting offshore, there may be a pretty, we may have an easier fight than we think.
And the only concern that I was, beyond the focus, is the question of the extent to which, if the kinds of services, so the attractive story is, there's this data haven, this is where businesses are going to set up, we're worried about businesses leaving. But then the question becomes how much these businesses need to connect to someone. And if the issue is on the side of the connection, and you have already developed an approach that attacks the DNS system, attacks the payment systems, puts people in prison, uses drug seizure laws for DNS, etc., then it's not clear to me that simply being physically beyond the jurisdiction with your server will be enough either to draw the business there or to allow the business to go there, but still maintain the economies of a market here. So that's the difference that I see with the encryption, where you could actually do the full development elsewhere. As long as you need to continue to create a platform for the hundreds of millions of people here, you're still stuck within this framework.
It sort of goes back to the earlier discussion that the value of the network accrues to the network and not to the company at the center. So if Etsy were in Iceland, Etsy's value is in the Etsy marketplace, and that marketplace has to exist elsewhere, has to exist primarily here. And so if the ability to connect to that marketplace is not there.
I mean, there's still another, 6.7 billion customers elsewhere. I mean, I have to, it's hard for me not to boil up as the Canadian listening to an hour and a half, and as a person who runs an organization where, by far the biggest portion of our customers are not in this country, by far. And so, I guess what I would say is that I would kind of turn your guys' caution down a little bit, but really support what Brad's saying, in that I think there are important political fights to win here. There's no question. But to think that all of us need to agree on a political strategy and certainly to agree on tactics, that's crazy, and I don't think anybody's suggesting that. So I think that's a great thing to try, and there's probably a business case to try it. But try to kind of either just think that the fights here are the most important fights, they aren't, or that this is the only place that matters. It doesn't. That's a thing to kind of stay away from. This idea of like, can you create this, internet economic zone or whatever it's called? That's, again, I think the problem that you pointed out, you could solve, one part, but then other things are going to be a problem. But I think some of those things do start to solve themselves. And just as an example of that, the software patent problem that has been brought up a couple times. In Amsterdam, there's this effort underway called Appsterdam. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this, where they literally looked at sort of the insanity of the software patent situation specifically for app developers, and said we're going to try and build this zone that effectively protects app developers and try and convince U.S. and elsewhere app developers to move to Amsterdam and work on building apps, knowing that they won't have to deal with this kind of software patent fight. And so that's an example of a very, very narrowly focused version of that, but potentially could drive other places or other countries or other regions to say like, well, we need to change if we're beginning to lose developers to that thing. But that's targeting a really, really narrow problem, and I think that is the type of thing that can be more effective than trying to solve everything in one single shot.